All right, let's begin. So welcome everybody to today's ATS section on medical education webinar. This is going to be a webinar on how to publish how I teach papers. Our panelists today are going to talk about their work in publishing scholarly activity regarding their topics of interest. As part of a summary, this is part of a series on scholarship in medical education done through the section on medical education. These are the talks that we've had so far. These are all available on the ATS website. And we have some more webinars coming up. These are the topics that we have coming up. These promise to be fantastic talks as well. Our panelists today are Doctors Edwin Jackson and Eugene Yuriditsky. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves and give us a little bit of a background on their clinical interests. So we'll have Edwin go first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edwin Jackson from the Indiana University School of Medicine. I'm an assistant professor in clinical medicine and associate program director in pulmonary and critical care medicine. My clinical and educational interests are echocardiography, both transesophageal and transthoracic. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Eugene?
Hi, all. My name is Eugene Yuriditsky. I'm at NYU Langone Medical Center. I work in both cardiology and critical care, specifically in the cardiovascular ICU. And I'm interested in all things hemodynamics, pulmonary embolism, medical education, physiology.
Wonderful. And my co-moderator for this talk is Dr. Abi Kumaresan. I'll let Abi tell us a little bit about herself.
Thank you, Dr. Matusov. So I'm Abi Kumaresan. I'm an assistant professor of anesthesiology and cardiac surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and I am both a practicing anesthesiologist and critical care intensivist. My specific interests include point of care ultrasound and also skeletal muscle wasting in the ICU.
And I'll be co-moderating. My name is Yuri Matusov. I'm also from Cedars-Sinai. I'm a pulmonologist with a focus in pulmonary vascular disease and an associate program director for research for the fellowship. So with that, these are the two papers that Drs. Yuriditsky and Jackson have published in ATS Scholar. And these papers are going to frame the discussion that we have today. So these are available on ATS Scholar for review after. So let me come off this. So to begin the discussion, I'd like to ask, maybe Dr. Jackson could start. Tell us a little bit about your paper. Tell us a little bit about the impetus for your paper. And then we'll do the same with Dr. Yuriditsky.
Sure, Yuri, thank you. So this paper came about just looking at things that we teach often and things that we enjoy teaching in the ICU. Our paper describes how we teach ICU trainees, so medical students, residents, and pulmonary and critical care medicine fellows, how to estimate right ventricular systolic pressure using echocardiography. We used a flipped classroom method with 7 brief e-learning modules along with deliberate practice at the bedside. And what we did is we described how that works in the ICU, also some of the pitfalls associated with this type of teaching and with this type of learning. And within the paper, we're actually able to include links to some of the modules that we describe within the paper.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Yuriditsky?
Yeah, thank you. So my subject was looking at positive pressure and how it impacts the right ventricle. And the reason I took an interest in that subject is because it's something I feel like we encounter all the time in ICU. It informs us on how patients respond to volume, what happens when someone deteriorates during intubation in the institution of positive pressure ventilation, what happens when we take them off. But yet it's not something that's really formally taught. I always feel like it's something that comes up in little sound bites here and there, like, oh, when you breathe in, this is what happens with blood flowing to the heart. So we really wanted to develop something that would allow for kind of a formalized curriculum for the residents, fellows, and APPs in our ICU. And we developed kind of a way to break this subject down into smaller subsubjects, teach it formally. We have protected education time during our cardiac ICU rounds, and then take some of these concepts to the bedside, heavily relying on analogy and illustration.
Wonderful, thank you. So the way that the purpose of this webinar is really to teach and to provide advice for folks who have an idea and how to sort of translate that educational idea into sort of a publication. And you both have done a fantastic job of that. You both wrote wonderful papers. And so I guess to start off the discussion, let me ask you kind of how did you develop this educational concept? Why don't we start with Dr. Jackson?
Yeah, thank you. So it was really something that is done very, very often by cardiologists. So you always get that formal echo, and they always mention, this is the right ventricular systolic pressure. And as many of you have probably noticed, sometimes they'll say, cannot calculate RVSP due to lack of TR jet. So that was always a big question from our trainees. Why can't we estimate right ventricular systolic pressure if they don't have a TR jet? So as we began to explain this, it really occurred to me that, the basic medical student resident, even early in training pulmonary fellow, doesn't really understand how this modified Bernoulli equation works or when to implement it. So it was really kind of out of one necessity, trying to teach people things that we think they should know, but two, out of interest, because everyone always wonders, why can't cardiology estimate an RVSP with no TR jet? I know we have a cardiologist here today, so I don't mean to badmouth cardiology, but it's always something that we wonder.
That's great. Dr. Jackson, I have a follow-up question for either you or Dr. Yuriditsky. How do you narrow down, so all of us being intensivists, all of these questions kind of come up repeatedly, and I'm sure all of us can think probably of 10 questions that come up from the trainees, even the nursing staff, et cetera. How do you narrow down what type of question is best answered in this paper format? Meaning, which types of topics deserve kind of a more formal process versus which types of topics, as Dr. Yuriditsky said, can be a quick soundbite or a chalk talk if available.
Yeah, great question. It's really the topic that holds interest. So we've all been in the ICU teaching, our trainees, and you can see they're kind of wandering off a little bit. Maybe they start checking their phones. Those are probably topics that aren't really going to make a good paper. But if you're talking about something and everyone is listening, everyone's engaged, that's really the start of something that could probably be written about and people would have an interest in reading it.
Dr. Yuriditsky, do you have a thought on this as well? That was a great answer.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I really like that answer. I think on top of that, just to add, is that there's certain subjects that are just so fundamental that they kind of underlie so much of what we do. So if you don't understand basic respiratory or hemodynamic physiology, most of the ICU is probably going to be very confusing, and picking it up in little bits here and there might not work really well. So sometimes I think there's value in look at a concept that really kind of permeates everything that we do and try to break it down. Once you have the foundation, then you can build on top of that.
Great answers. So you both published in ATS Scholar. ATS Scholar sort of has very specific formatting for how they'd like these papers published. But past that, sort of how did you decide how to present this information? How did you decide, for example, what type of tables to put, how to sort of structure the information that you wanted to include, and sort of balance the nuance and detail with sort of things like word counts and also interest to your audience?
Yeah, great question. The way that we have been trying to write the majority of our papers, not just this one, is for people to be able to pick up the paper, read a section, and then try to incorporate what is written in that section into their bedside sonography. So with the kind of how I teach paper and how ATS Scholar has us, set it up and write it, it really lends itself to that. So you can pick it up and say, okay, I want to learn how to estimate right atrial pressure. So that's kind of the first part. We talk through that. There's a module for that. You can go try it, put the paper down, see if you can do it, and then come back to the second part. So it's really meant for, I don't want to sound like an old man, but I feel like I am getting older, kind of this more TikTok generation where they want kind of quick, I can read this, I can try it, I can put it down, and I can come back.
Yeah, Dr. Yuriditsky, your paper was slightly different. Obviously, you were going into heart-lung interactions. How do those sort of concepts apply to your work?
Yeah, so I'd love to say that we just had an idea and we knew exactly how to go about it. This was a long iterative process. And initially, it actually started off as a paper about all of heart-lung interactions. So kind of getting into that issue of word count, it was really challenging. And then once we submitted the initial paper, we realized this is probably a little bit too much. We got to make this simpler. And so we settled on, let's focus on just the right ventricle and positive pressure, and then broke everything down further and further and further in a way that kind of, as Dr. Jackson is saying, could apply to the TikTok generation. So something with easily referenceable tables and short paragraphs, and at the same time, enough detail that when you really want to get into it, you can take your time.
And when you had those discussions, was it sort of among your co-authors, or was it with the journal editors, or was it with sort of, other folks who you ran this by?
Yeah, so it was with the editorial board. So after the initial submission, we kind of looked at it and it felt both dense, detailed in some ways, and maybe lacking detail in other ways, trying to stick to that word count requirement. And then when they were really fantastic. We sat down and had a meeting with the editorial board. And after doing that, realized, what the best way to do this is really just cut down a little bit on what we're going to focus on.
You both, that's really great. You both pointed out something that I think is interesting. It's this appeal to kind of the younger generation, which I think is becoming more and more apparent to us who are moving into mid-career. The question I have for you is somewhat related to that. So it sounds like both of you have perhaps published your work in other places or are kind of used to publishing from this education standpoint. But what I mean by that is, I do a little bit of research, and I always find that prospective studies, et cetera, like traditional research publications are easier for me, but I have a hard time trying to turn some of my educational material into publications. So the question I would have for both of you is, do you structure your teaching based on the fact that you want to publish it in the future, or is it kind of just work out that way, or do you go back and pick a topic and then structure it in a way that can be published? Like, which comes first, if that's clear?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of both. So some of the other work that we've published has been kind of a process to look for intercostal arteries and veins when doing pleural procedures like a thoracentesis. So we kind of would do these procedures, and at our institution, it's really common to use a linear ultrasound probe with color and then power Doppler to screen for intercostal arteries or veins in the intercostal space. So we kind of looked around and saw that this really hadn't been written about in a protocol format. So we decided to kind of take that idea and what we already do as very common here and then write about it. So that's one instance. Another instance is just really, especially with ultrasound, because I think it's becoming more and more popular. I mean, obviously, it's something that graduate medical education wants all their trainees to learn and understand. So it's been kind of easy to write about basic ultrasound. How do you hold a probe? What kind of probe is this? What views are basic? What views are advanced? So it's really just kind of almost what's in vogue now in terms of, ultrasound. And then really what we do all the time that maybe isn't done at other places that we think might be valuable for people to know about.
Dr. Yuriditsky, do you have a method to this or an approach to kind of publishing your educational work for those of us who are just starting?
Yeah, so I think with a lot of past educational papers, they really were review articles. You kind of think of a way that you want to present something you're really passionate about, and it becomes sort of a traditional type of review article. This one was so much more focused, or at least it was supposed to be a lot more focused on really the teaching aspect of things. So I would actually say that for this paper, I learned so much from writing this and figuring out how to structure it for everyone else that I took that back to the ICU. Rather than I want to say that this is exactly how we teach, and it was so easy just to take that material and put the paper together. I think it was a little bit more of this paper really helped actually restructure how I think about things and how I can present things to the audience.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a very important point. And I think we've all probably done this where we've written about a topic and we feel like we've come away with that topic with a way greater degree of understanding than how we went into it. And I guess one of the questions that I had is, you're both educators, you're practicing intensivists, you're researchers, and when you publish these things, when you think about publishing these papers, how do you select a journal? ATS Scholar obviously is is one of our larger educational journals for in pulmonary and critical care. But there are other educational journals that exist. Both in general medical education and in other subspecialties. And your material has a lot of crossover for internal medicine residents, for cardiology trainees, anesthesia trainees. So how did you pick ATS Scholar, and did you consider other journals when you when you were looking for a home for this type of work?
Yeah, another really good question. With full disclosure, I've submitted things to ATS Scholar before and had them rejected. So, I try I try the higher quality journals first. And then sometimes you go down from there. We really like to read ATS Scholar, especially the How I Teach portion. I mean, there's been so many of these articles that kind of help you become a better educator in the ICU. They had this series on uh, putting in peripheral IVs. We've done hundreds of those things, but reading that article, it's like, wow, I'm going to take some of this with me. So I wanted to have an article in a journal that I read and that I like.
Yeah, similarly, I've been reading ATS Scholar probably since its inception. Really love the journal. I think for critical care education, it's really a premier journal. We've had success publishing something different in the past. So I think once I thought that we really should publish something on this physiology, ATS Scholar is the first thing that came to my mind. Critical care education equals this journal.
Great, great. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Um,
I guess sort of to
sorry,
follow
sorry.
up on the on Dr. Jackson's comment. I, you mentioned you'd submitted things to ATS Scholar before, I'm sure to other journals, and I'm sure you've sort of had to you've gotten papers rejected. What are some of the pitfalls of submitting a paper like this, right? Or what have you experienced in the past where you feel like you've had an experience that you've learned from that's made your subsequent submissions of this sort better?
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to accept constructive criticism. It's always reviewer two that'll get you. You just have to be willing to say, okay, I think that what I've written here is right because this is what I do every day. And when someone's reading it, they might feel like, you know what, that doesn't make a lot of sense. You may want to change this or add that or take this out. So it's just really accepting the reviewer's critique and then adjusting your paper, not changing your paper to make it something that you didn't want it to be, but really taking that criticism and improving your paper. And I think the ability to do that and to work with the editors and reviewers has been really helpful for me with this journal and others.
Yeah, I agree. I think, for me, putting away that ego and thinking I know how to explain this, but realizing maybe this doesn't make sense if all the reviewers are saying it doesn't make sense, that's a really important component to the whole process. I also think one potentially useful piece of advice is reaching out to the journal first. I would have had a lot of trouble if I had invested all of this time into a pretty dense paper and then have it rejected journal after journal after journal, only just to sit on my hard drive eventually.
Those are two really great points. Speaking of handling rejection, etc., any of us who publish or write grants or anything, the list of rejections, if you keep them, are always quite longer than the list of acceptances. What do you both do? You both seem quite experienced, but what do you do about mentorship, etc.? So, if you're starting out, if this is one of the first papers you're publishing, maybe as an attending or as an intensivist, um, any advice for finding people, either, now through Zoom, even at other institutions, but even in your own institution, um, and how you get guidance on this, when you're just starting out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going to national meetings, like going to the ATS national meeting, going to CHEST and going to the sessions that you find interest in and kind of seeing, who's moderating those sessions, who's presenting those sessions, and just talking to them about your research idea. I think as critical care, everyone is pretty collegial. We like to read things, we like to write things, we like to network. So I think going to meetings and also cold emails. Sometimes you just see someone who wrote a paper and you send them an email like, "Hey, I really like your paper. I have an idea. Would you be willing, to review this with me or to see where I've gone wrong here?"
I think that's a great suggestion. If anyone ever emailed me about one of the papers I'd written, I think it would probably be one of my best, one of the best days of my week. Um, Dr. Yuriditsky, what are your thoughts on the mentorship?
Yeah, I think if you're looking internally, especially, I think it's worthwhile to look for people who have a track record of mentorship. Sometimes there's a tendency to reach out, to the department chair, say, "Hey, can you help me with this paper?" But they're probably going to be busy with other stuff. So looking for maybe someone mid-career who has a good track record, routinely works with trainees, and has gotten people published would be useful. And also asking around. It's pretty easy. People develop reputations very quickly, for better or for worse. Seeing, hey, who gets people published? Who really is a good mentor? Who has the time? Who will respond to your emails within a month?
One of one of the unique things about this format of paper publication of this type of article is you're not really talking about results, right? You're not talking about the impact that your intervention has had on, your audience. And one of the sort of questions that always comes up is what things do you think work well that way, and what things do you think you really need some results? You really need some evidence that this is actually effective. And how do you make that distinction? And sort of who do you look to help you make that distinction?
Yeah, this one is kind of when you're working through for promotion and tenure, at least at our institution, you have to have what's called a review of teaching. So someone has to come and watch you, teach whatever topic that you have. So for this paper that we did on right ventricular systolic pressure, we actually had a few of our more senior faculty come and watch us teach this and kind of see if there's any improvements that we could make. So of course, everyone had a lot to say, do this, do that, but it was actually really helpful. And it kind of gives you the confidence to say like, okay, the learners like this, they seem to be interested in it. But, sometimes when you're the attending on service, everyone has to pretend like they're interested in what you're saying, more or less. But if you have one of your more senior faculty members who are like, yeah, this is pretty good. There's some value here. I think that helps give you the confidence to know that, what you're doing is at least on the right track.
Yeah, I would say to piggyback on that, I think for the purpose of writing a paper like this, I think education research is challenging. A lot of it's based on surveys and can be quite subjective. But I think you need to start somewhere. So coming up with a format that you can write about or describe how you do something. And maybe step two, the next paper is let's actually try this out. Let's go through a series of fellowship and residency classes and see, do they think this was a valuable lesson? Did they improve in terms of their knowledge? Maybe even conduct a quiz pre and post, but got to start somewhere.
Thank you. Great answers. Great discussion from everyone. I'd like to give the attendees an opportunity to ask any questions, anything you can put in the Q&A box, or raise your hand and things like that. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, any final comments from either one of you, sort of final advice to offer folks on this topic.
Thanks for tuning into the webinar. Hope you found some value here, and I hope to read your paper in ATS Scholar in a future edition.
Yeah, I second that. I mean, it's a great process. Be prepared to work with the editorial board. They are fantastic. You will go through what they told me in the very beginning is that one of the big issues with papers like this is they turn into reviews rather than how I teach papers. I thought I was writing a how I teach paper. My first version was probably more of a review. But working with the editorial board was really a fantastic experience. I learned a lot from them and the reviewers and kind of how to better shape an educational paper. So it's a lengthy process. It's challenging at many steps, but it's really worthwhile at the very end. So go for it.
That's great. Thank you
Thank
guys
you
so
all.
much.
Thank you. This has been I want to thank the ATS section of medical education for giving us the opportunity to present this. This is part of our scholarship in medical education series. If you tuned in a little bit later, the prior sessions, the prior webinars in this series are on the ATS website. And we have a number of webinars coming up. We aim for at least once a month on how to do scholarship in medical education. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.